So here's an interesting paper looking at use of AI, artificial intelligence, in image analysis from mammography images to see if it can help pick up abnormal images. And it's a very interesting study design. It's being done in Sweden, and it's on a very large population level. A lot of patients being screened, about 80,000 women. So every woman who's going through a routine mammography for screening between 2021 2022 is being evaluated in this study in a randomized fashion. So, interestingly, the routine methodology is to have two people look at the mammography. So normally when a mammography has been done, it's looked at by one radiologist and a second radiologist, and they try to come up with a consensus reading. If there's differences between the two, then they discuss. I'm assuming this is a routine procedure over there. And what they tried to do was to see if we can use AI to have one radiologist read the image. So basically save the time of a second radiologist reading these 80,000 images, right? So they divided them into 40,000 going to the double reading, the standard, and then 40,000 going to mostly single reading. However, what they did was that in the very high risk score from the AI, they did do a double reading. So just to be sure that if there was a say very high risk, because they didn't know if AI will be good enough by itself, so then they wanted to have a double reading for the most high risk patients. The other interesting thing is that look at these risk scores they're talking about, risk score of 1 to 9 and risk of 10. So this was a very unusual way of using AI that I have not seen before, where what they did was that all the 40,000 patients who were being looked at by AI were divided into 10 groups. So almost equal length, although group one has like 8,000 patients, but then it's 4,000, 4,000, 4,000, almost, so 3,600, 35, 31, 3,000. So slightly decreasing as you come up, but it's almost like a 10th percentile distribution that you're getting on a risk score. And I think they mentioned that in methodology that the AI algorithm was designed to say that if you take 10 patients, you basically sort them in the ascending or descending order of the risk of having a pathology on the scan. So it's not just, okay, this is high risk, this is low risk. It's almost like a 10 grades or 10 levels of risk. That is, this risk is so high, it's 10, its risk is so low, it's 1, and then everything in between. And what they later on did was that they said everybody at score 7 or below, so 1 to 7, is low risk, 8 and 9 is intermediate risk, and 10 is high risk. So although algorithm doesn't divide them into three groups, it divides them into 10 groups. Then, but practically speaking, when they are trying to do, okay, what to do with them, they grouped everything into low risk and medium risk and high risk. So I'm still a little puzzled how this score of 1 to 10 is calculated, and is it based on some statistical calculation or formula? The company they used for analysis, use AI tool, is actually commercially available. It's called Transpara. Transpara is based is actually available as on their website. They say it is FDA cleared and CE marked for 2D and 3D mammography, and is available in 30 countries. And on the website, I haven't gone through it, but in the paper here, they mentioned that the Transpera, probably the information was provided by Transpera to them. I'm going up to find that, but basically they said that Transpera says that their AI model was trained, it should be in methods, was trained on 20,000. Yeah, here it is. So Transfera, it was trained on more than 200,000 examinations for training. So that's a very large training data set. That is impressive. And what's further impressive, that out of these 200,000 examination, 10,000 cancers were included, which were biopsy proven, biopsy results were there, and they were annotated in the training of this software. So extremely well trained software, but I'm still unclear on what this score of on a continuous scale of 1 to 10 is, and how they train the model to score a mammogram onto the scale, that, why is it 3, why is it 4, why is it 5. So there must be some parameters they looked at. But in this paper, they basically grouped everyone into low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk as scores of 1 to 7, 8 to 9, and score of 10 or higher. And in future, it may be, as Transpera software gets better, it just cuts into these three groups, and eventually maybe only two groups, high risk versus low risk, which probably you're trying to get from a AI mammogram, right? Okay, does this patient has a risk of cancer or not? So that's one interesting. Just in methodology, there are a couple of other points to mention. Let me go to the flow of patients where I can probably explain it easier. So 80,000 patients, randomly divided 40,000 who will get AI reading and 40,000 who will get the double radiologist reading, right? And what they were having was that in these double readings, if there is in this AI reading, if the score is low, then a single radiologist just look at it and that's it. If the score was intermediate, then the radiologist will still look at it. However, now the radiologist will be provided highlights on the mammogram by the AI. So in the low risk, there was no highlights by the AI, and the radiologist looked at it and said, "Yep, looks fine." But to that single radiologist, the AI marking was available in the intermediate risks and above, intermediate and high risk. But for the high risk, they actually had the second radiologist also look at it. Not same radiologist, it was a pool of 12 radiologists, all very well trained in mammography, have been doing this, screening mammography for a long time. I think the key finding, if I just jump to that on this paper, is interesting. What they are trying to show is that the AI supported screen reading procedure enabled a 44.3% reduction in screen reading workload. So this is an important point to remember. What they're trying to show is that you can reduce the burden of work. Now remember, this is routine mammography screening. Patient is not symptomatic. These are 80,000 women in 1 year, right? Almost or less. So if you're doing a mass public screening or population level screening, and the outcome is something very small, so out of these 80,000 women, about 500 or less women eventually turned out to have something cancerous, malignant, right? So out of picking those 500 out of 80,000 is a very tedious task. And it's so boring and tedious that they have two radiologists look at the same image because one may miss it. And I'm not sure it's just because that one person may never have picked it if he had only that one image look at that year, right? You are looking at hundreds of images every day because you have so much workload. And what AI they're trying to show is that when you use AI, you could just rely on one radiologist alone and still have similar outcome. So they're not saying that, oh, AI can replace the radiologist completely, but they're saying that if you use AI to screen low risk, so that single AI radiologist look at it, there's no marking by AI, it says, yep, looks fine, and you'll be okay. Now, the second is the intermediate risk where AI says, hey, let me turn on the areas of concern so just to be sure that you don't miss it. And in a high risk, then they have a second radiologist look at it and have a consensus and so on and so forth, because the next step after that is a recall and then probably a biopsy. Now, it's interesting that they have about, I would say, 1,500, 1,600 people recalled out of 80,000, and out of 16, 1,700, so less than 2,000 women recalled out of 80,000 who probably needed the biopsy. I'm assuming recall means biopsy. Only 500 actually turn out to be, so 1 in 4 or less or more. So 1 in 3, between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 turn out to have a tumor on a biopsy. So this is pretty good public screening. But that's my point here is that what this paper really shows is that in a large public screening, if you use AI, you could reduce the burden on the radiologist and make his or her job a little easier and life easier. Now, the number of cancers detected is very small. So, although there is a trend for higher number in the group with AI on cancer detection, we cannot rely on that information to say, oh, AI is better picking up cancer just because the numbers are too small. It did not reach statistical significance. Also, there was a trend. So, if I jump to the results here, just to show you those numbers quickly. Um, So here's the number. So intervention of almost 40,000, 4 less and 24 more on the control group. Number of recall is where there is a concern. Come back. So slightly more recall, 861 out of 40,000 in the AI group and 800. So almost 1,700 or so recalls total in the control group. And the recall rate is very close, but again, slightly higher rate in the intervention group as compared to the control group. So without AI. So AI is recalling a little bit more. And out of those, 244 cancers were detected in the AI group and 203 cancers were detected in the non-AI group or double radiologist group. And again, slightly more number and slightly more cancer detection rate per 100,000. So 6.1 with the range of zero point 0.5, zero point 0.4. So this is a confidence interval because this is statistical calculations. So about 6 per thousand compared to 5 per thousand, right? So one more patient per thousand. So if the number needed to treat or NNT or number needed to diagnose, if you need to diagnose one more cancer patient, then you need 1,000 patients to detect one more when you're using AI over a radiologist, over two radiologists, right? False positive rate, meaning that how many turn out to be not cancers, even though they were called back, is 1.5%. So that's like this 2.2% out of these 2.2%, 1.5% were false positive, these recalls, right? And out of these 2%, 1.5. So false positive rate is the same. It's not that AI is overcalling. But remember, AI has a backing of a radiologist. So it's not that you just took all the intermediate risks and call them back, right? So that wouldn't work. You can't take even all the high risk to call them back. Remember, the high risk had 2,000 or so patients. So there were 861 that were recalled, right? To keep that number in mind. Sorry, I'm jumping back and forth here. But the high risk group alone was 2,875, right? So you can't just say, oh, just recall everybody who's 10. That will be too high of a false positive rate, right? The false positive rate is comparable between the two groups, two radiologists and one radiologist, likely because the radiologist here is still calling the shot. It's like, no, 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 we don't need to call all these 2,875 people scoring 10. Only 416 out of these were recalled. So it's not that all the 861 recalls in AI group were all from score 10. There were also 116 from the score of 9 and 65 score of 8. So even if you take the high risk and intermediate risk, it still only covers 600 or so recalls. So 80% of the out of the 861 recalls, they were still recalled all the way down to the level one, right? So this is very interesting that even when the AI thought that there's no risk, that single radiologist who looked at that images between 1 and 7 scores, and these are a lot of images, right? These are almost like 70% of the or 80% of the patients in this low risk group where AI is not marking anything. And AI is just saying, oh, low risk, and single radiologist look at it, second radiologist not looking at it, and single radiologist looking at the images without the evidence or support of the AI marking. And he's still recalling almost 100 or so patients, or more than 100, it's like 200 patients or so. And out of these, although so there are a few cancers, not a lot, right? So which may be that you don't have to it may be okay, maybe next year they will be picked up as an intermediate risk or so, right? But and it's not a lot, it's one, so it's like maybe 5 cancers or so in the low risk group. So the radiologist is still able to pick up some cancers that the AI is not picking up and has some recall. And here the false positive rate is high. But I think the false positive rate of just using 10 or 9 or 8 score essay or recall all of them and get biopsies would have been terrible. Very, very bad numbers just by doing that. So having that radiologist still seems to be necessary when you're using AI. And you can't just say, oh, AI will tell us which 800 to recall or something like that, right? It is not doing a great job. Even with score 10, you can't recall every single one, right? I doubt there are any cancer missed in those that were not recalled with score of 10 because the cancer was still more than in the two radiologist group. Even when two radiologists look at it, they are calling less people, not statistically significant, but in number wise, slightly less people, right? So this is an interesting study to look at to see how you can use AI. I'm still a little puzzled by the scoring method of 10 levels. And clearly, when the score is higher, there is a much more chance of radiologist also thinking there is something abnormal. And then once radiologist also agrees, then there's a much higher chance of getting the cancer. But bottom line is that there was no statistically significant difference between two radiologists looking at the images versus an AI and a radiologist looking at images and working together. Now, it may be as AI gets better, and you keep the radiologists with the AI, they will eventually start beating the two radiologist group. So it's almost like radiologists alone, but yes, there are two independent radiologists, two independent minds compared to one radiologist and one AI. Eventually, it may start beating it because these numbers, but I don't know, it may also depend on how you design it. If you keep gonna dividing people into 10 almost equal components or fragments or segments by design of your software, then you will always be end up just statistically with a lot of people in group 10, right? If it's going to be a tenth of the persons that you're screening as top 10 score, so I'm puzzled by it. This should not be the way, right? You should score it based on the burden of abnormalities that you're looking at the images. So the score 10 should be given to very few people, should be close to this 400 number, maybe 800 number or something like that, right? So if you take 8, 9, and 10, but here is almost like equal distribution. So this is just like a statistical distribution, or you're in the top 10% risk of having a cancer. So I'm not sure how the Transpara is training the algorithms, or what they're eventually trying to get out of it. Maybe that's a safer way of doing it. You have less chance of missing, although there's still some missed cancers. Very few, right? If you look at this, only 5 out of 244 cancers were missed, and these were presumably, I don't know for sure, were the early stage ones. And if that's the case, then maybe they were picked up the next year as they become slightly more noticeable or slightly bigger or something like that. So I will stop here and see what's the future of AI in imaging holds for us.